A young mother falls into a coma after a devastating car accident. While she is unconscious and unable to speak or move, her overbearing and controlling mother-in-law secretly steals her newborn. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching this video from. Rain pressed softly against the windshield as Rachel Monroe sat in her parked car, the engine humming beneath her. She exhaled, hands resting protectively over the swell of her belly. 35 weeks. It was hard to believe how close she was. The ultrasound photos, freshly printed and still warm in the folder on the passenger seat, showed a little hand curled like a seashell and a heart beating strong. Her OB-GYN had smiled and said, "It could be sooner than you think. He's ready." Rachel smiled to herself now, though a knot of worry tugged just beneath the surface. The sky over Seattle had turned slate gray, and a cold drizzle misted over the glass. She adjusted the air inside, turning on the defroster. Her fingers trembled slightly. Maybe it was nothing. Just nerves, just hormones, but something about today felt unusually still, as if the world had paused, waiting for something unnamed. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it back in her purse. Caleb had offered to drive her to the appointment this morning, but she'd waved him off, insisting she felt fine. He had looked at her skeptically as she grabbed the car keys. "You shouldn't be driving alone this far along," he'd said. "Especially not today. The storm's moving in fast." "I'm not an invalid, Caleb," she'd replied with a tired smile. "Besides, it's just a checkup." Now, sitting alone in the car, her heart beat a little too fast. It wasn't fear, not yet, just unease. She glanced at the folder again. Her son, the name they hadn't settled on yet, though she favored Ethan. Caleb preferred something more classic, like Henry, but they hadn't argued over it. Not really. They hadn't argued much at all lately. They hadn't talked much either. Rachel started the wipers and pulled out of the parking lot, merging onto the wet road. Downtown Seattle blurred behind her, and soon she was heading north toward home, the rain intensifying with each mile. The tires whispered over the slick pavement. Traffic was light. She checked the time, 4:23 p.m., and noted that the roads, unusually, felt too quiet for a weekday. She glanced at the radio, then back at the road. She didn't see the truck until the last second. The sound was not what she imagined a collision would be, not metal or glass. It was more like the cracking of bone underwater, a dense rupture that came from everywhere at once. The impact flung her forward. Her head struck the steering wheel, and the seatbelt carved into her shoulder. A scream caught in her throat. Her abdomen clenched violently. The world spun sideways. Then the pain came. Sharp, paralyzing, primal. Her belly burned as if her skin had been torn open from the inside. Her water broke. She tried to speak, but blood filled her mouth. The smell of gasoline stung her nose. The windshield shattered like ice, and through it she saw rain falling in sheets. She turned her head with effort, neck screaming in resistance. Her car had been pushed into the guardrail. A large semi-truck loomed behind her, smoke curling from its hood. Its driver's door opened. A shadow stepped out. A man, tall, wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the storm and the dimming light. Rachel's hand rose weakly. "Help," she tried to say, but it was just air. Her fingers curled and fell against the glass. The man walked toward her, then stopped. He stared for a moment and turned around. He walked away. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just in her mind. The pain was spreading, radiating down her legs, across her back. Her vision pulsed with black spots. "My baby," she whispered. "Please, not my baby." And then everything went dark. The sound of machines was the first thing she heard when she returned to the world, a steady beep, 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 faint and mechanical like the echo of time itself. Rachel? A voice. Male. Familiar. Caleb. Light filtered through her closed eyelids. Her lips moved, but she couldn't feel them. She couldn't feel anything. "She's coming out of it," another voice said, female, clinical, vitals stabilizing, but motor function is still compromised. "What about the baby?" Caleb asked. His voice cracked. There was silence. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Rachel wanted to scream, to sit up, to demand to see her son, but her body felt like it belonged to someone else. Every inch of her was numb, trapped. "She's conscious," the doctor said. "That's the first step." Time passed, days maybe. She slipped in and out of sleep. Nurses came and went, their faces blurred like paintings washed by rain. At some point, her eyes opened. Fluorescent lights buzzed above her. The ceiling was sterile white. She couldn't move, couldn't lift her hand. Her throat was raw and something was taped to the side of her neck. She turned her eyes slowly, painfully. A woman stood nearby, adjusting a monitor. Black braids, soft voice. "You're awake," the nurse said kindly. "But don't try to move. You've suffered a spinal cord injury. The doctors are monitoring your progress. It'll take time." Rachel's lips cracked. Her voice was barely audible. "My baby," she rasped. The nurse froze. She glanced at the door. "Just rest," she said quietly. "Don't worry about that now." "No," Rachel whispered. "Where is he?" The nurse shook her head. "You're not ready. You need to focus on healing." Then she turned and left the room. The door clicked shut behind her. Rachel lay there, chest rising and falling rapidly. Tears slid down the sides of her face. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her heart monitor beeped faster, out of rhythm with the slow, mechanical calm of the hospital. She waited. Hours passed. The shadows in the room shifted. At last, someone came again. The woman who entered wasn't a nurse. She was older, in her 60s, dressed impeccably in a tailored coat of dark velvet. Her hair was pinned back in a smooth bun. Her heels clicked softly on the tile. Evelyn Monroe. Rachel blinked. Where's my son?" Evelyn didn't smile. She walked to the foot of the bed, looking down with thinly veiled contempt. "You still have the nerve to wake up," she said. Then calmly she raised her hand and slapped Rachel across the face. The crack echoed through the room. "You don't get to ask about him," Evelyn said, voice cold. "He doesn't belong to you anymore." Rachel's breath caught. Pain exploded in her cheek, but it was nothing compared to the terror that spread through her chest. "What do you mean?" she gasped. "My son and I will raise him," Evelyn said. "You are unfit. Look at you, a broken body, a fragile mind. You were in a coma, Rachel. You didn't even wake up for your child." "That's not true," Rachel said, shaking her head. "I want to see him. He's mine." Evelyn leaned closer, her eyes like glass. "He's mine, now." The door opened again. Caleb entered, looking pale, his eyes distant. He was in a suit, briefcase in hand. Rachel reached for him. "Please, Caleb, don't let her do this." He looked at her and said nothing. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "He understands," she said. "Finally." Rachel felt something inside her break. They turned and left. The room fell silent again, filled only with the whisper of machines and the distant sound of rain. When the door opened hours later, it was a different nurse. Young, nervous, red curls tucked under a cap. "My name's Marina," she said softly. "I just started here. I want to help you." Rachel turned her eyes toward her. "Where is he?" she whispered. The nurse bit her lip. They said he's being cared for elsewhere, with family, but there are things that don't make sense. Rachel stared at her, pleading. I don't know what's going on, Marina said, glancing at the door, but I think you're being kept in the dark on purpose. Rachel reached for her, fingers twitching. Please, she said, find him. Marina nodded. I'll try. Outside the clinic, the clouds hung low over the city. Evelyn Monroe walked calmly to her car, where a baby carrier rested in the back seat. She leaned over the child, adjusting his blanket. The infant stirred, blinking up at her. You're safe now, she whispered. No more chaos, no more weakness. Just the future you deserve. The engine started, and she drove away. The clouds over Seattle thickened as Evelyn Monroe pulled into the long, curving driveway of her Mercer Island estate. The storm had passed, but the sky still hung heavy like the last exhale of a held breath. Inside the car, the newborn boy stirred gently in his carrier, wrapped in a pale blue blanket Evelyn had bought the same day she learned of Rachel's pregnancy. A soft gurgle escaped his lips as she turned off the engine. She stepped out of the car, heels clicking confidently on the stone pavement, then opened the back door. The baby, so small and unaware, blinked up at her with that unfocused, primal gaze of the newly born. Evelyn reached in, adjusted his hat, and smiled. Not a smile of warmth, but of possession. She lifted the carrier with surprising ease for a woman of her age and stepped into the house. Inside, the foyer was pristine and cold, the air filtered and faintly perfumed with eucalyptus and leather. She moved through the house like a woman fulfilling a vision long planned. In the nursery upstairs, painted a neutral gray, outfitted with a white oak crib, designer mobile, and monogrammed linens, the baby was placed gently into the crib. Evelyn stood over him, watching his chest rise and fall. You'll never remember her, she murmured, and one day you'll thank me. Downstairs, Caleb stood in the study, staring blankly at the decanter of whiskey he hadn't touched. His tie was loosened, his shirt rumpled. He had barely slept since the night Rachel was rushed to the hospital. He had been there during the surgery, had seen his son for the first time through the glass of the NICU, had held the tiny hand with shaking fingers. But nothing since then had felt real. When Evelyn entered the room, he didn't look at her. She's stable, she said simply, as if delivering a weather report. Caleb nodded. Doctor said she opened her eyes yesterday. She's not ready, Evelyn replied smoothly, still disoriented, confused. She asked about him, Caleb murmured. Evelyn poured herself a glass of water and sat down in the leather chair across from him. Of course she did, that's natural. But let's not forget what the doctor's report said. Acute psychological trauma. Possible dissociative state. Hallucinations. She didn't even recognize me at first. Caleb's jaw tensed. I was there. She said my name. She's not well, Caleb. Evelyn's voice was quiet, measured. She hasn't been well for a long time. The stress of the pregnancy, the isolation, the way she's withdrawn from everything these past months, we've both seen it. She can't care for a child. Not now, maybe not ever. He turned away from her, looking out the window toward the darkening sky. I don't know, he said softly. I don't know anymore. Evelyn stood and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. That's why I'm here. To help. To make sure he has the stability he needs. I've already spoken to Dr. Holt. He agrees we need to move quickly. Rachel's medical condition gives us every legal reason to request temporary guardianship. Caleb didn't respond. He simply closed his eyes. The next morning, Evelyn drove to the offices of her longtime associate, Raymond Kelser, a retired family court judge who now consulted privately on sensitive cases. Over coffee in his quiet, windowless office, she laid out the situation. "She's medically incapacitated," she explained. "The hospital's own physician supports a finding of temporary incompetence. I have the documentation." Raymond studied the papers she placed before him: Rachel's discharge summary, the signed psychiatric evaluation, the consent forms Caleb had initialed. "You've done your homework," he said. Evelyn smiled. "I always do." "And you want full custody?" "Temporary, for now, but yes, in time, permanent." Caleb will co-sign. He's too emotionally shaken to take full responsibility, but he agrees this is for the best. Raymond tapped his pen against the file. "You'll want to file for emergency guardianship first. If you want it to stick, I'd suggest additional psychiatric evaluations, preferably from someone reputable but cooperative." "I have someone in mind," Evelyn said calmly. "Dr. Karen Bellamy. She owed me a favor after that ethics hearing last year." Raymond raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "You're confident she'll comply?" "She always has." That afternoon, Dr. Bellamy visited the clinic. Rachel was drowsy, disoriented, and still heavily medicated. The doctor asked questions in a soothing voice, but Rachel's replies were slow, garbled, and sometimes incomplete. She could hardly hold a pencil, let alone advocate for herself. She asked about her son, Marina told Dr. Bellamy in the hallway. Dr. Bellamy smiled. "That's to be expected." "She seems more aware than you think," Marina added, hesitant. The doctor turned sharply. "Let me do my job, Nurse Vega." The report was signed before sunset. Diagnosis: impaired cognitive function due to trauma and pharmacological sedation. Recommendation: continued observation, restricted external contact, and suspension of maternal rights pending recovery. Meanwhile, Marina returned to Rachel's room, her mind racing. Something felt wrong. She had only been at the clinic a week, but already she'd seen 2 other patients who seemed too aware for their labels. And now this young mother, half paralyzed, begging with her eyes for her child. Rachel stared at her as she entered. "Did she say?" Rachel managed, her voice a dry rasp. Marina shook her head. "They're saying you're not well enough yet." Rachel tried to lift her hand, but it barely moved. Her eyes filled with tears. Marina leaned closer. "I'll find out more," she whispered. "I'll try." Later that night, Marina accessed the clinic's restricted files through a nurse's terminal. It wasn't hard. No one had changed the administrator password in months. She searched Rachel's name and found a sealed guardianship order pending. Filed by Evelyn Monroe. Witnessed by Caleb Monroe. Attached was a signed consent form, giving temporary custody of Ethan Monroe to Evelyn, effective immediately. The date on the document was 3 days after the accident. Marina printed a copy, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her coat. Across the city, in a penthouse conference room overlooking the Puget Sound, Evelyn sipped tea as she reviewed a draft of the guardianship petition with her attorney. "She'll challenge it eventually," the lawyer said, "but we'll be prepared." "She won't be capable of mounting a legal challenge for months," Evelyn replied, "and by then the child will be fully integrated here. The courts will prioritize continuity." The lawyer nodded. "What about Caleb?" "He'll do as he's told. He always has." 3 days later, Rachel was transferred from the high-dependency unit to a long-term recovery room. The move was quiet, without ceremony. Marina was the only one to greet her. The room was small, sterile, with a single window facing the back alley. No flowers, no cards, no trace of a newborn son. Marina came in during the night shift, her face pale with worry. "I need to show you something," she whispered. She unfolded the printed guardianship form and laid it gently on the bed tray. Rachel stared at the paper, then at Marina, then back again. Her lips parted in disbelief. "No?" "I don't know how they got it through so fast," Marina said, "but it's legal. Your husband signed. Evelyn has custody." Rachel's entire body began to shake. The heart monitor beeped erratically. She gasped for breath. Marina gripped her hand. "Breathe. Please breathe." Through tears, Rachel choked out a single word. "Why?" And Marina, eyes glistening, had no answer. A nurse entered suddenly, alerted by the monitor. She saw the papers on the tray and snatched them up. "You're not allowed to have this," she snapped. "It was a mistake," Marina said quickly. "I found it in the wrong file." The nurse glared at her. "We'll see about that." As she left, Marina turned back to Rachel. "I'll try to fix this," she whispered. "I swear to you, you're not alone." Rachel stared at the door long after she was gone. Outside, the wind howled softly through the alleyway, and the city lights flickered under the clouds. Ethan Monroe slept in a nursery of privilege, wrapped in monogrammed blankets, beneath the painted stars of a ceiling his mother had never seen. The following morning began in silence, the kind that had settled over Rachel Monroe's hospital room like fog, thick, inescapable, and unnerving. Machines hummed, monitors blinked, and the light from the narrow window remained dull, gray, and reluctant. Rachel lay motionless on the bed, her body covered by a thin blanket that offered no comfort, her legs numb and useless beneath it. Her right hand twitched weakly every few minutes, the only movement her body could afford without searing pain. Her head throbbed with a low, pulsating ache, but it was nothing compared to the deeper pain, the vast, hollow emptiness in her chest. Her baby was gone. Not in the way mothers lose their children to illness or fate or tragic circumstance, but stolen, taken from her while she was too broken to protest, too sedated to scream. Her child, the boy she had felt grow inside her for 35 weeks, had been stripped from her arms before she ever had the chance to hold him. She had not cried yet. The body, she suspected, knew when crying was futile. It saved the tears for when there was a reason, for when sorrow could at least be accompanied by some action, some result. But now, no such relief existed. She was imprisoned in her own body, confined to a bed, denied even the knowledge of where her son had been taken. Only Marina, the young nurse with earnest eyes, had dared to break the curtain of secrecy. Only Marina had shown her the truth, a printed document, a guardianship order, with her husband's name at the bottom. Rachel's mind replayed that moment over and over, like a warped film reel. The flick of the paper as it was unfolded, the crinkling sound as Marina laid it on the tray, the trembling of her own fingers when she tried to touch it. Caleb had signed away their son. And Evelyn had orchestrated it all with ruthless efficiency, hiding behind sympathy and civility, like a spider waiting for a moment of weakness. The door creaked open. Rachel turned her eyes slowly, expecting another nurse with a chart and a tight-lipped smile. Instead, Marina slipped inside, her red curls pulled into a ponytail, her face unusually pale. "I only have a few minutes," she whispered, pulling the curtain closed behind her. "They've moved me to a different wing. I'm not supposed to be on this floor anymore." Rachel's heart jumped. "Why?" she asked, the word barely escaping her lips. "They said there was a personnel realignment, but I think they know I showed you the file." Marina glanced around. Someone must have told them. Rachel blinked, trying to push herself up. Her arms trembled under the effort and she collapsed back into the pillows, breathless. "You have to be careful," she said slowly. Don't lose your job." "I already have one foot out the door," Marina replied, her voice tight. "I don't care. I've seen enough here. You're not the only patient they've silenced. But what they're doing to you is worse. It's criminal." Rachel nodded weakly. "Where is he?" Marina hesitated. "They won't tell me anything directly, but I overheard Evelyn Monroe on the phone yesterday. She said something about pediatrician appointments and enrolling him in a private infant wellness program on the east side. That's a wealthy part of town. I think he's with her." Rachel's lips trembled. "Does he know Caleb?" Marina's eyes softened. "I saw him once. At the nurse's station, he looked lost." Rachel turned her head away, her face pressed into the side of the pillow. Marina stood quietly for a few moments, unsure what to say. Then she reached into her pocket and took out a small notebook and pen. "You can barely write, but maybe if you dictate something, I'll write it down. Is there anyone you want to contact?" Rachel turned back to her, hope flickering in her eyes. "My sister," she said. "Anna Harper, Portland." Marina wrote it down carefully. "Okay, I'll see what I can do, but they monitor outgoing communication." Rachel forced herself to keep her eyes open. Her brain was sluggish, her thoughts floating like dust motes in murky water. But one thing was clear. She had to get stronger. She had to get out. That night, she began to move her fingers deliberately for the first time. She willed her right hand to squeeze the bed rail. It responded sluggishly, but responded. Her left leg, though numb, began to tingle when she shifted her weight. Each effort cost her hours of breath and stillness, but it was a beginning. A rebellion in inches. The following morning, Marina didn't come. Rachel waited, watching the door, but no familiar red curls appeared. Instead, a new nurse named Darlene came in, brisk and impersonal. She adjusted the IV, checked the monitors, and left without a word about Ethan. The silence around the baby was growing louder, as though the entire facility had agreed to erase him from Rachel's narrative. Days passed. Therapy sessions began. Slow, methodical, humiliating. She was wheeled into a sterile room where a physical therapist named Ken worked with her, moving her limbs, stimulating nerves, encouraging tiny movements. At first, she hated him, hated his cheerfulness, his relentless optimism. But as her body began to respond, Rachel realized he was the only one treating her like a person and not a problem. Each night, alone in her room, she whispered her son's name, Ethan, over and over. As if by speaking it, she could summon him. She imagined the curve of his cheek, the softness of his skin. She imagined the sound of his breath as he slept, the tiny sighs babies made in the middle of dreams. She imagined pressing her lips to the crown of his head and telling him he was safe, that she would never let anyone take him again. But morning always came without him. On the 12th day after Marina's disappearance, a visitor came. Not Caleb, not Anna, but a tall, narrow man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Dr. Roland Baxter, an independent psychiatric consultant. "I've been asked to conduct a follow-up assessment," he said, flipping open a leather folder. "Standard protocol after prolonged sedation and traumatic injury." Rachel regarded him warily. "I didn't request an assessment." He smiled thinly. "Of course not. This is administrative, routine." He asked her questions. Simple at first, name, date, current president, then more subtle. Did she ever feel unsafe? Had she experienced moments of confusion? Did she remember what happened during the accident? Did she harbor any feelings of guilt about the trauma? Rachel answered slowly, cautiously. Every word was a calculation. She could feel the trap in his questions, the way he led her toward admissions she didn't want to make. "No," she said finally. "I'm not confused. I remember everything, and I want to know why I haven't seen my child." Dr. Baxter looked up from his notes. "Your child is in good hands." "That's not an answer," Rachel snapped, her voice stronger than she'd expected. He closed his folder. "This has been helpful," he said. "I'll file my report." As soon as he left, Rachel's fingers twitched with rage. The next morning, a newspaper was left on the tray beside her breakfast. She hadn't received reading material in weeks. Puzzled, she pulled it closer and unfolded it with shaking hands. One article had been circled in red pen. "Mothers Without Rights, a Hidden Epidemic in Private Clinics." Rachel's eyes widened. The byline read, "Jordan Price, Seattle Weekly." She read every word. The article described a rising number of women being declared unfit while recovering from birth-related trauma. Many were sedated, isolated, and declared incompetent by private psychiatric consultants with ties to family court attorneys or private guardians. The article did not mention her name, but it might as well have. At the bottom, someone had handwritten a note. "You are not alone. We're looking into it. Hold on. JP." Her heart pounded. The message could only have come from Marina. She looked up, tears pricking her eyes. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tray. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt the faintest ember of power return to her. That night, during a therapy session, she asked Ken how long it might be before she could walk again. He paused. "It's hard to say, but I've seen people come back from worse." She nodded. "Then let's start." Outside her room, rain fell again, a soft, steady rhythm against the window, but Rachel Monroe no longer heard silence. She heard the sound of resistance beginning. The next morning began with a fire in Rachel's limbs. Not literal fire, something more elemental. A surge beneath her skin, a pulse in her spine, the silent scream of muscles that had long been still. For weeks she had lain flat, a prisoner of her own healing body, watching her life unfold in the hands of strangers. But now something had shifted. The newspaper article, the red circle, the hidden message, "You are not alone," had planted something inside her. A seed of resistance. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was rage, and it was enough. The physical therapy room had the sterile chill of a place unused to joy. Everything was white and metal, the scent of bleach clinging to the floor. Rachel was wheeled in by a silent orderly and left at the edge of the exercise mats like forgotten luggage. Ken, her therapist, greeted her with his usual nod and clipboard. He was a man of routines, and Rachel appreciated his lack of sentimentality. "We're going to start with the arms again today," he said, glancing over her vitals. "If your pressure holds, we'll move to assisted standing by next week." "No," Rachel said quietly. "Today." Ken raised an eyebrow. "You want to stand today?" "I need to," she said. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair, knuckles white. "Start with the legs." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But I want to be clear, this will hurt." "Good." It did. As he moved her legs, stimulating the nerves, urging blood flow back into long idle tissue, Rachel gritted her teeth against the pain. Sweat beaded along her forehead, her heart pounded out of rhythm, and more than once she felt the room tilting. But she didn't stop. She held on, breath by breath, until her body, slowly, stubbornly, responded. By the end of the hour, she had shifted her own weight in the harness for the first time. It wasn't standing, but it was upright. It was more than the clinic ever expected from her. When Ken gently lowered her back into the chair, he looked at her with new eyes. "You've been holding back," he said. "No," Rachel replied. "They've been holding me back." That evening, alone in her room, she traced the muscles in her thighs with her fingers. They were weak, softened by weeks of disuse, but they were hers, still hers. She flexed her toes until they responded. Then she reached for the notebook Marina had left hidden in the false bottom of the drawer. In it, she began to write. "Ethan. Your name is Ethan. They gave you to her, but you are mine. I will come for you." Her handwriting was shaky, crude, slanted like the hand of a child, but it was a declaration. The next night, Marina returned. She came late after shift change, her face partially hidden beneath a scarf. She slipped through the door and closed it behind her, locking it from the inside. Her presence filled the small room like a breath of cold air. "I can't stay long," she said, whispering. "They're watching me. My badge was deactivated this morning. I had to borrow another nurse's code just to get in." "Why risk it?" Rachel asked. "Because I can't let them do this to you." Marina pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "Jordan Price wants to meet. He said you need legal representation. He's contacted someone. Her name is Iris Talbot. She's taken cases like this before. She's hard to scare." Rachel stared at the paper. "I'm ready," she said. "Tell him yes." Marina nodded. "There's more. Evelyn visited the clinic yesterday. She didn't ask to see you. She went straight to the administrator's office. Afterwards, 2 files were deleted from your chart, your therapy progress, and a note from Dr. Lynn saying you showed full cognitive awareness." "They're erasing my recovery," Rachel whispered. "Yes, and I think they're preparing to transfer you to another facility, somewhere out of state." "No," Marina looked at her. "We have to act fast. Can you sign something? If we can get a power of attorney filed, Iris can start moving on your behalf." Rachel nodded. "Bring it. I'll sign." Later that night, after Marina had left, Rachel began to work. She forced herself to sit up on her own. She moved from the bed to the chair without assistance. She dressed herself inch by inch, muscle by muscle. Every motion was an act of defiance. She was no longer the woman they thought they could silence. Days passed. Each one brought more pain, but also more strength. Her sessions with Ken grew longer. By the end of the week, she was standing with a walker. Not steadily, not gracefully, but upright. Her face flushed with effort. Her arms shook with the weight of her own body, but her eyes gleamed. When Caleb arrived unannounced, she was standing. He entered the room without knocking, carrying a small duffel bag. His face was drawn, thinner than she remembered, his eyes red-rimmed. "Rachel," he said. She didn't speak. She let him see her first, upright, sweat on her brow, hair pulled back tightly, every inch of her standing for itself. He stood frozen in the doorway. "I didn't think you'd," he began. "Walk again?" she said, voice hoarse. "They didn't think I would either. You signed papers that said I couldn't." He looked down. "I didn't know what else to do. They told me you were gone, Rachel. They told me you wouldn't wake up. But I did." "I know." He stepped closer. "I came to see if you're ready to talk." "About what? The son you gave away? The mother you empowered to erase me?" Caleb sat in the chair across from her, his hands shaking. "She said it was temporary. She said it was for Ethan's safety." "His safety?" Rachel barked a bitter laugh. "From what? Me? I'm his mother." "I know." His voice cracked. "I made a mistake. I see that now." She stared at him. "Do you?" "Because she's not done. She's deleting records, planning to move me. I won't let it happen." He looked at her, the full weight of guilt settling in his shoulders. "What do you want me to do?" Rachel turned her eyes toward the window where the rain had started again. "Testify, tell the truth, and stay out of my way." He nodded. "All right." That night, Marina returned with the power of attorney form. Rachel signed it with a trembling hand, the pen pressing hard into the paper. The next day, Iris Talbot arrived at the clinic. She was in her late 40s, with dark hair tied back in a braid and a leather briefcase worn from years of battle. She didn't waste time on introductions. She entered Rachel's room like a general surveying a battlefield. "You're stronger than they wanted you to be," she said. "I'm not strong yet," Rachel replied, "but I'm not broken anymore." Iris sat down and opened the file. "Jordan's article helped, but we need more. Evidence, witnesses, financial trails, and above all, speed. Evelyn's filing for permanent guardianship next week. If she gets it, it will be 10 times harder to undo." "She doesn't love him," Rachel said. "She wants control." "I believe you, but courts need more than belief." Iris closed the folder. "I need names. Doctors, nurses, anyone who saw what was done to you. Marina, Dr. Lynn, Caleb. Then we'll start there." That night, Rachel took her first unaided steps down the hallway. She held the rail with both hands, her legs trembling beneath her, each step a small earthquake in her muscles. Nurses passed her, staring. Some with surprise, some with annoyance, one with fear. She didn't care. She walked. To them, she had been a file, a diagnosis, a liability. Now she was a problem. Back in her room, she collapsed into the chair and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, her son slept under a roof that wasn't hers. Somewhere out there, Evelyn Monroe was preparing to erase her from history. But Rachel Monroe was no longer asleep, and her body had begun to rise. It was a cloudy Wednesday when Rachel was wheeled into the courthouse for the first time. The air outside was cool with a faint edge of spring, and she could smell the distant trace of wet pine from the city's trees, still heavy from the morning's rain. Her attorney, Iris Talbot, walked beside her, speaking softly, going over what to expect, though Rachel already knew. She had imagined this moment every day since she'd awakened in that hospital room, since she'd first seen the guardianship papers and realized her son had been taken from her. But nothing in her imagination had quite captured the sound of the courthouse doors closing behind her, the echo of wheels on tile as the chair rolled forward, or the sterile chill that replaced the weather once they entered the marble atrium. She was not here as a mother, not really. Not yet. She was here as a petitioner, someone asking to be recognized as something she had never stopped being. And in this place, titles were granted by paperwork, not biology or love or pain. Iris pushed the wheelchair herself, refusing to let anyone else near. Rachel was dressed plainly, in a long-sleeved navy blouse and a gray wool skirt that fell over her legs, her hair combed back and fastened with a black clip. Her posture was straight, her face calm, but her fingers trembled on the armrest. They entered the courtroom. It was smaller than she expected, intimate, almost clinical. A few rows of benches lined the back wall. Caleb sat in one of them alone, looking worn. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, but his eyes met hers as she was wheeled past. She didn't nod, didn't look away, only stared until he dropped his gaze. At the petitioner's table sat Evelyn Monroe, dressed impeccably in a tailored cream jacket and pearl earrings, as though she were attending a board meeting. Beside her were two attorneys, Preston Vale and Naomi Kern, both from a high-powered family law firm out of Los Angeles. Evelyn didn't look at Rachel. She was reviewing a file, making notations in the margins with a gold pen. The judge entered and the room stood, except Rachel, who remained seated in her chair, her spine erect. "Be seated," Judge Cynthia Raleigh said. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled tightly into a bun and eyes that scanned the room with surgical precision. "This is case number 1476F, Monroe v. Monroe, regarding the guardianship of minor Ethan Monroe. Petitioner, Evelyn Monroe. Respondent, Rachel Monroe." Rachel kept her expression neutral as the names were read aloud. Her title wasn't Mother, not here, just Respondent. A word that suggested defense, implication, accusation. Preston Vale rose first, addressing the court with practiced ease. "Your Honor, we submit that Evelyn Monroe is currently the temporary legal guardian of Ethan Monroe, having obtained this status under emergency conditions when the child's biological mother was medically incapacitated following a motor vehicle accident. At that time, Miss Rachel Monroe was nonverbal, partially paralyzed, and undergoing psychiatric observation. Her attending physicians agreed she was not competent to make decisions on behalf of her child." He turned briefly toward Rachel, then back to the judge. "Though we are pleased by Mrs. Monroe's recent physical improvements, we remain concerned for the child's welfare. Ethan Monroe has been under the petitioner's exclusive care for nearly 2 months. He is thriving, emotionally, physically, developmentally. This hearing is to determine whether it is in the child's best interest to remain in that environment or to be returned to a mother whose current abilities, mental, physical, and emotional, are not, we believe, sufficient." Iris stood. Her voice was low, measured, each word placed deliberately. "Your Honor, my client, Rachel Monroe, was indeed injured in a severe accident. But she is not, and never has been, mentally incompetent. She is a victim of trauma, not madness. She was denied her child while in recovery and without due process. Her husband, who initially signed over temporary custody under pressure, has since acknowledged he was misled and has provided a sworn affidavit to that effect. We intend to demonstrate that the transfer of guardianship was neither legal nor ethical." Judge Raleigh nodded. "Proceed with your witnesses." Preston called Evelyn to the stand first. She moved smoothly, as if she had done this many times before, and sat with an air of quiet confidence. "Mrs. Monroe," he began, "can you describe the condition in which you found your daughter-in-law after the accident?" "She was unconscious for nearly 2 weeks," Evelyn said, voice calm and steady. "When she awoke, she was incoherent. She didn't know her name. She couldn't speak. Her limbs were barely responsive. The doctors feared she might have permanent brain damage." "And what steps did you take in response to that information?" "I petitioned for temporary guardianship to ensure Ethan had a stable, loving environment to come home to. My son, Caleb, was in no condition to care for an infant alone. He was devastated by Rachel's condition and overwhelmed." Iris rose. "Mrs. Monroe, did you inform Rachel's family, her sister, her parents, before filing for guardianship?" "They were unreachable at the time. Have they since contacted you?" "I have not received any direct communication from them," Evelyn said coolly. "Do you recall telling staff at the clinic not to share updates about Ethan with Rachel?" "I told them not to distress her unnecessarily. She was fragile." Iris leaned in slightly. "Did you, at any point, consider that Rachel might recover and wish to reclaim her son?" There was a pause. "I considered it," Evelyn said, "but I didn't believe it was likely." Caleb was called next. He sat stiffly, hands clasped in his lap, eyes flickering nervously toward both women. He confirmed that he had signed the guardianship papers, but added that he had been under emotional duress and had not fully understood the permanence of what he was doing. "I thought Rachel might not wake up," he said. "Evelyn told me that if we didn't act quickly, the state might intervene. I didn't know what was right." Iris moved in gently. "Do you now believe Rachel is capable of caring for Ethan?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Evelyn's attorneys objected to the relevance of his opinion, stating that as a father who had relinquished his rights, his testimony should carry limited weight. Judge Raleigh allowed it to stand. Then it was Rachel's turn. Ken, her physical therapist, testified first. He spoke of her progress, her commitment, her strength. "I've worked with stroke survivors, spinal cord injuries, trauma patients," he said. "Rachel's recovery is among the most determined I've seen. She pushes herself harder than anyone. She's focused, disciplined, and her primary motivation is her son." Dr. Lynn, the clinic's former neurologist, had to be subpoenaed. He arrived nervously, carrying a slim folder of medical notes. Under oath, he acknowledged that Rachel had shown early signs of recovery, more than had been reflected in her official record. He admitted that some of his progress notes had been deleted from her chart, though he claimed not to know by whom. "I was told it was an administrative error," he said. Iris called Marina last. The young nurse entered the courtroom with shaking hands but a straight back. She told the court how Rachel had asked about her child almost immediately after waking, how her access to information had been restricted, how Evelyn had visited the facility multiple times, instructing staff to limit Rachel's exposure to distressing stimuli, including news of her own son. "She never stopped asking," Marina said. "She was never confused. She was desperate. They treated her like a problem to manage, not a mother to support." Then Rachel was called to the stand. The bailiff helped her into a chair beside the witness box. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "I carried Ethan for 35 weeks, she said. "I was there for every appointment, every ultrasound. I talked to him every night before I slept. When the accident happened, I didn't know if I would survive, but the first word I tried to speak when I woke up was baby. They didn't let me see him. They told me I wasn't ready, that I didn't need to know." Her eyes turned toward Evelyn. "I didn't lose him. He was taken." Preston rose slowly. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, "isn't it true that you suffered from anxiety during your pregnancy?" "I had morning sickness," she said, "and I was tired. That's not anxiety." "Were you ever treated for depression?" "No." "Do you believe you are currently physically capable of caring for a newborn?" "Not alone," she admitted, "but I don't plan to be alone. I have a support system, friends, a lawyer, a therapist, and I've been through hell to see my son again. That has to count for something." The courtroom fell quiet. Judge Raleigh reviewed the files for a long time before speaking. "I will issue a ruling within 5 days," she said. "Until then, temporary guardianship remains with the petitioner." Rachel's body sagged slightly in the chair. The session adjourned. As she was wheeled out, Caleb followed. "I'm sorry," he said, voice tight. "I know it's not enough." "No," Rachel said, staring ahead. "It's not." Outside, the wind stirred the bare trees, and the gray sky hung like a verdict. 5 more days. She would wait, but she would not surrender. 5 days passed not like a countdown, but like a sentence. Rachel lay awake most night, staring at the ceiling of her temporary apartment above Iris's office. It had no baby crib, no lullaby sounds, no scent of powder or warmth of midnight feedings. It smelled faintly of printer ink and dust and the subtle perfume Iris wore, lavender and citrus and something oddly grounding. There was a couch, a bed with a stiff mattress, and a kitchenette where Emily, Rachel's friend from college and now her unexpected savior, made soup and sandwiches between research calls. The ruling had not yet come. Judge Raleigh's delay, couched in a formal statement about reviewing all submitted materials and ensuring an impartial decision, was interpreted differently by each person on Rachel's side. To Iris, it meant the judge was being meticulous. To Emily, it meant the court was afraid. To Rachel, it meant nothing except more hours of separation. Ethan was still gone. He was with Evelyn, still breathing air perfumed with white lilies and expensive floor polish in a home he didn't know was not his own. Rachel had not seen him, not even a photo since before the trial, not since Caleb had shown her one, awkwardly, on his phone, days before the hearing. The baby had looked different. Bigger, rounder. His eyes had opened fully now, blue like hers, not gray like Caleb's. His skin was no longer mottled, his mouth firm and pink and full of life. And she was missing all of it. Rachel had not cried during the trial. She had not wept in court. Not once had she collapsed, broken, not when Marina testified, not when Evelyn stared at her with that smug indifference, not even when the judge delayed her decision. But on the fourth night after the hearing, she sobbed uncontrollably into a folded towel to keep from waking the others. Her body bent forward, clutching the pillow like it was her child, gasping for air between gulps of grief. Iris found her that way and said nothing, only sat beside her and placed a hand gently on her back. "You don't have to be strong every second," Iris had murmured. "I do," Rachel whispered. "If I'm not, they'll say I'm unstable." "You're human, Rachel. That's not the same as unfit." Rachel said nothing after that, but the next morning she rose earlier than usual, dressed herself, and spent an extra hour with Ken, who had agreed to continue her therapy outside the clinic. She took every step as if it were a vote, as if walking, balancing, lifting herself unaided was proof not only of her will, but of her right. On the fifth day, the ruling came, and it was not what they hoped for. Judge Raleigh had issued a written decision. Temporary guardianship was to remain with Evelyn Monroe, citing stability and continuity of care as overriding factors. While the court acknowledged Rachel's improvements and did not dispute her competence, it ruled that an abrupt change in environment might be harmful to the child. Visitation rights were granted, 2 supervised sessions per week, each 2 hours long, under the oversight of a court-appointed child welfare officer. Rachel stood at the window of Iris's office, reading the printed ruling with hands that trembled so violently she could barely hold the pages. Her knees went weak, and she sank into the chair as if the earth had suddenly disappeared. "They gave her my child," she said, voice cracking. "No," Iris said firmly, sitting across from her. "They gave her time. That's all this is, a stalling tactic, and we're going to break it." "I don't want time," Rachel said. "I want my son." "Then we appeal." Iris didn't hesitate. That same day, they filed an emergency motion to appeal the ruling, citing suppression of evidence and material manipulation of medical records. Jordan Price, the journalist who had begun writing about Rachel's case in the local press, published a second expose that night. This time, he named names. He included the details of Dr. Bellamy's questionable psychiatric assessments, the deletion of Dr. Lynn's progress notes, and Evelyn's long history of influence within the judicial system. The article caught fire. Rachel's case went from whispered court scandal to local headline, The next morning, a sealed envelope arrived at Iris's office. No return address. Inside was a scanned copy of a financial transfer. Evelyn Monroe to Matthew Holt, dated 2 days before Rachel's accident. $60,000. Iris studied the document for several minutes in silence, then picked up the phone. "Get Price on the line," she said, "and tell him this time we name the doctor too." Rachel sat in stunned silence. "They paid to steal him from me," she said. Emily leaned forward. "They paid, which means it's traceable, which means we can use it." 2 days later, the appeal was accepted for review. A new hearing was scheduled. This time, Rachel would have stand-in as a co-guardian and active litigant. She would be allowed to testify fully. And new evidence, including the bank transfer and a sworn affidavit from Caleb admitting to coercion, would be admitted. The courthouse was different this time. There were cameras, protesters, reporters. Rachel entered through a side door accompanied by Iris, Emily, and Marina, who had agreed to testify again. This time, she was not just a nurse. She was a witness to a crime. Evelyn arrived with her attorneys, walking with slow confidence through the crowd, sunglasses shielding her eyes. Caleb followed at a distance. He no longer looked like a man unsure of his loyalties. He looked ashamed. The courtroom was nearly full. The judge presiding over the appeal was not Raleigh, but Judge Alicia Martin, a younger, more progressive jurist with a reputation for transparency and unpredictability. She called the session to order and addressed both sides with a steady voice. "This court is aware of the public attention this case has garnered," she said, "but our only concern here is the law, the evidence, and the best interests of the child. Let's proceed." Iris began by entering the financial documents into the record. Then came the audio recording, sent anonymously, of Evelyn's conversation with Dr. Holt. "I don't care if she wakes up or not," Evelyn's voice said, clear and cold. "I just need that baby out of her and into my hands. She's not stable, never has been. I'm prepared to make this worth your time." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. Caleb closed his eyes. Judge Martin turned to Preston Vale. "Mr. Vale, would your client like to respond?" Preston looked at Evelyn, who remained expressionless. "My client denies any wrongdoing. We will challenge the authenticity of the recording." Judge Martin nodded. "So noted. Proceed." Then came Marina's testimony. This time she didn't tremble. She stood tall and spoke clearly. Rachel Monroe was aware. She was coherent. She asked about her baby every day, and the staff was instructed to withhold information. Her progress reports were altered. Her assessments were manipulated. And every time she showed improvement, someone made sure it was erased. Rachel followed her with a statement of her own, this time not from the witness box but from her wheelchair placed directly before the bench. Her voice was steady but not cold. It was quiet and deliberate, filled with the weight of weeks of silence, months of pain. "I did everything right," she said. "I went to every appointment. I took care of my body. I prepared our home. I talked to my son every night. I planned for his life. And then I woke up in a hospital room where no one would say his name. They said I was confused, that I was broken. But I was not broken. I was grieving. Grieving the life that had been taken from me in the name of order and wealth and control. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for anything I didn't earn. I'm asking to be allowed to be my son's mother." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Evelyn did not testify. Her attorneys declined to call witnesses. When Judge Martin adjourned, she promised a decision within 72 hours. no more. As they exited the courthouse, Rachel was surrounded by a small crowd, supporters, strangers who had followed her story, women who had come to say they believed her. One placed a hand on her shoulder and simply said, "For all of us." That night, Iris received a call from Caleb. His voice was flat. "She's planning to leave the state," he said. "Miami. She already has tickets." "She won't make it," Iris replied. "Not now." "She'll try." "Then tell the court." "I already did." The next morning, Judge Martin's ruling was posted online and faxed to both legal teams. The court nullified the guardianship. Custody was returned to Rachel Monroe in full. Evelyn Monroe was ordered to surrender the child within 24 hours. A formal investigation into her actions was opened immediately. Rachel stood at the window in Iris's office, tears running silently down her face as she watched the sunrise. Ethan was coming home. He would not remember the courtroom. He would not know what had been stolen, only what had been restored, but she would, and she would never forget. The morning Ethan was returned to her, Rachel awoke before the sun. The world outside was still wrapped in a soft blue haze, and the trees lining the street stood quiet and leafless, their dark branches silhouetted against a pale sky. She sat on the edge of the bed in Iris's guest room, fully dressed before 6, her hands folded in her lap, her heart steady but braced for a tremor that she couldn't yet name. No one had told her exactly when Evelyn would comply with the court's ruling. The judge's order had made it very clear. Ethan was to be delivered to Rachel by 10 o'clock that morning. No delays, no intermediaries. But Evelyn had not spoken to anyone. Her lawyer had offered only a short, tight-lipped confirmation. Rachel half expected to be forced to go fetch him herself, but Iris had insisted she stay put. "He comes to you," she'd said, "not the other way around. That's how justice works now." Justice. The word still felt unfamiliar. After everything, months of lies, silence, humiliation, it seemed impossible that a single decision could return what had been taken so completely. And yet, that was what was happening. Rachel had spent the last 2 days preparing herself not for the return of her son, but for the impossible weight of holding him again. She had dared to imagine the weight of his small body, the scent of him, the sound of his breath. She had dared to imagine singing to him again, bathing him, watching him blink up at her with no memory of what had passed. But she had not allowed herself to believe it. Not until now. Emily arrived a little after 7, carrying a bag of supplies, diapers, blankets, a few soft toys. Her face was bright, but her eyes were glassy with emotion. "Everything's ready," she said, placing the bag by the crib they'd set up beside Rachel's bed. "I got the formula you used to like, and I picked up that white onesie with the tiny stars. You used to love that one." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. She moved to the window, watched the street below. At 9:48, a dark gray car pulled into the curb. Her body froze. Iris came to her side, placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll go," she said. "You stay here." Rachel didn't move. She watched as Iris walked down the front steps, crossed the sidewalk, and opened the back door of the car. The driver stepped out, an unfamiliar man in a suit. Then Caleb emerged, his face drawn and pale, holding a carrier in both hands. Rachel's knees buckled. Emily caught her gently, guiding her to the chair by the crib. She sat, barely breathing, her fingers curled tightly into the fabric of her pants. Her whole body was buzzing. The sound of the door opening below floated up like something from a dream. Then footsteps on the stairs. the creak of the floorboards, the doorknob turning. Caleb stepped into the room and stopped. The moment held. The baby in the carrier stirred. Caleb looked at Rachel for the first time in weeks, his mouth trembling. He took 2 steps forward and placed the carrier on the floor. Then he knelt beside it and unbuckled the straps. Rachel couldn't move. She watched as he reached in and lifted Ethan into his arms, holding him with an aching tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Then, slowly, Caleb rose, crossed the space between them, and placed Ethan into her waiting arms. The world stopped. Rachel held her son against her chest, one hand behind his head, the other cradling his back. He was warm. He smelled of milk and faint cologne, but beneath it, she could still smell him, her child. He made a soft noise, a little squeak of protest, then settled. She pressed her lips to the top of his head and breathed in. Her body shook. Neither Caleb nor Iris nor Emily spoke. No one moved. The moment belonged to Rachel alone. She didn't cry, not right away. She just sat, her whole body curled around him, rocking slightly, as though trying to remember how to exist in a world where he was real again. Where this wasn't a memory, or a dream, or a hope. After a long while, she looked up at Caleb. "I won't stop you from seeing him," she said quietly, "but you don't get to decide anything else. Not anymore." He nodded. "I know." He didn't stay long. He kissed Ethan's head once, whispered something Rachel didn't catch, then left without looking back. Rachel didn't watch him go. She was too busy counting her son's fingers, tracing the line of his cheek, reacquainting herself with every tiny feature. That afternoon, the house filled with sound. Emily sang softly as she unpacked baby clothes. Iris fielded a dozen media requests, refusing them all. Jordan Price stopped by briefly to check on Rachel, dropping off a printed copy of his latest article, headlined, "Motherhood Restored, the Courtroom Victory That Shook Seattle." Rachel read the article late that night, rocking Ethan in the new chair Emily had found on Craigslist and painted soft green. The words felt distant and strange, like they belonged to someone else. But the photo of her walking out of the courthouse, head held high, Ethan's name on her lips, that felt real. 2 days later, Rachel moved out of Iris's apartment and into a small yellow house just outside the city. It had a wraparound porch and a backyard with a half-broken swing. Anthony, Emily's cousin and a contractor by trade, helped patch the fence. He brought a crib from his own attic, one his daughter had used years ago. "This place needs a little work," he said, handing her the keys. "But so do all of us." Rachel smiled. The first night in the house, she stood in the doorway of Ethan's room long after he fell asleep. She watched him through the slats of the crib, one hand resting lightly on the edge as if afraid he might vanish. But he didn't. He shifted in his sleep, made a soft, sighing sound, and remained. Weeks passed. Rachel fell into rhythms she had once only imagined. Early mornings, bottle feedings, naps curled together on the couch. Long walks with Ethan bundled against her chest. Therapy continued, though she now moved without a cane. Her body, once brittle and uncertain, had grown steady again, not through grace, but through sheer determination. She joined a mother's group at a local community center, women of all ages and backgrounds, some single, some married, some in situations far more complex than hers. They listened to her story and, in turn, shared their own. One woman asked her how she had not given up. "I almost did," Rachel said honestly, "but he kept me alive, even when he wasn't here." Anthony continued to visit, helping with repairs, always bringing something small, flowers for the windowsill, a wind chime for the porch, new knobs for the kitchen drawers. He never asked for anything. He never tried to define the bond that had formed between them. He simply appeared, quietly, steadily, like a tide. One evening, as they sat on the porch while Ethan napped, Rachel turned to him. "You've never asked about the future," she said. "I figured it's yours to decide." She nodded. "I don't know what I have left to offer." "You just described the strongest woman I've ever met," he said. "That's more than enough." She reached out and took his hand. He laced his fingers with hers without hesitation. Later that night, she wrote a letter. Not to Ethan, not to Caleb, not to Evelyn. To herself. "Dear Rachel, if you're reading this in pain, in silence, in fear, don't give up. I know what they did to you. I know what they took. But I also know you. You fight, you climb, you don't fall, and if you do, you rise again. There is a boy who will look at you and see the whole universe. For him, you get back up. For him, you don't let them win. Signed, Rachel. The one who didn't disappear." She framed the letter and hung it beside Ethan's crib, next to a photo Jordan had taken of them walking through the garden that first week home. In the photo, she's laughing, holding her son against her chest, his tiny fingers wrapped around her collar. It is not the picture of a courtroom victory. It is not the image of legal triumph. It is something quieter. It is the portrait of a mother returned to herself. That spring, Evelyn Monroe was indicted on charges of fraud, medical coercion, and unlawful interference in a custodial proceeding. She posted bail, but her name no longer carried the weight it once had. Her allies grew scarce. Her attorneys withdrew. She made no public statement. Rachel never heard from her again. By the time summer came, the house was fully alive. The backyard bloomed with wildflowers. Ethan took his first wobbly steps across the porch. Emily brought her guitar over on Sundays, and Anthony built a sandbox beneath the old tree. Laughter replaced silence. Music replaced fear. And one night, as the wind stirred the chimes and the moon rose above the roofline, Rachel stood in the doorway of her home and knew finally what it meant to come back. Not just to a house, but to life. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives. Watch our other videos for stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you. And if you believe others should hear this one, share it. Thank you for watching.